Coaching staff hiring cycle continues for the Washington Commanders as they found their new offensive line coach. And it's a bit of a head scratcher. But let's start with the good. What's going on, Washington Commanders Nation? Day after the Super Bowl, we announced that our guy, our all time leading sack leader, Ryan Kerrigan, is staying on staff as a linebackers coach and pass rush specialist. This does not surprise me at all. He's the one coach that I said you could turn this whole thing upside down, but I think Ryan Kerrigan has the plot armor, the resume, and the alumni allegiance to stay on any staff that's brought in here in DC. So he's going to be retained for the next one. And while I've liked the majority of how we've handled this coaching staff hiring, we have our first head scratching decision of the Dan Quinn staff. We just hired Bobby Johnson, offensive lineman's coach, the New York Giants. Yes, the Bobby Johnson that was just fired a couple weeks ago from the worst offensive line in the league. The second most sacked quarterback room in the history of the NFL. You thought Washington had a sack problem this year. The Giants gave up 85 sacks. That is second in NFL history, and they were headed by hothead OG Bobby Johnson, a guy that Brian Daboll brought over from Buffalo with him. So a guy goes a place and he brings one of his guys with him. That's his tribe. Those are guys that he trusts. Those are guys that he has a vision for. He'll pack up and take these guys anywhere with him. When they end up letting go of those guys, that should tell you everything you need to know. Kind of like how Jack Del Rio eventually had to be let go of by Ron. He didn't want to, but he had to. But I went straight up to ask my Giants guys, what are we getting in Bobby Johnson? And I asked my boy Danny, and he started laughing and was like, y'all are so fucked on the offensive line. And I was like, damn, is that bad? And he was like, just put it this way. The Giants have drafted so many highly touted, high-picked linemen, and they've all regressed over the last couple years under the tutelage of Bobby Johnson. They've regressed, and Evan Neal looks like dog shit. John Michael Schmitz has regressed tremendously, and when Andrew Thomas went down, there was no hope for that offensive line unit over there in New York. Does that mean that's how it's going to fare here in DC? It does not, but this is easily the first hiring that fans should not be excited at upon first glance. And after a 2023 where Washington, it felt like we were easily the worst line in the league. With context, you can see that it was not necessarily an offensive line problem throughout the entire season. In New York, it was 100,000% an offensive line problem. It would not have mattered who they put back there at quarterback. That O-line was getting beat like a fucking drum every week. And not to mention that the coaching staff was butting heads. This guy, Bobby Johnson, got into it and pushed a player in practice. I do like that, though. I like dog energy. I told you I want some screws loose here. So this apparently is a guy that will put hands on a player. But not ringing or glowing endorsements coming out of New York about this guy. Every media article, every fan reaction on social media, there appears to be no praise coming for the hiring of our new O-line coach. And I hope it works out because O-line coach is the number one position coach in the sport. They matter more than every other position coach that you bring in because these are the guys protecting your quarterback. They protect your number one investment. We're going to have a first-round quarterback playing behind this offensive line. So it's imperative that we bring a guy in that can teach, a guy in that can teach and a guy that can develop. I saw a quote from Bobby Johnson this season. It was a little worrisome. I'm not going to lie. A little worrisome. He said, we're just trying to get these guys ready for the next game. We're not trying to develop these guys. I had to read it again to make sure I wasn't tripping because that's a wild-ass sentence to say when you have hella starting linemen on rookie contracts. We're not here to develop these guys. We're just trying to get them ready for the next week. That is not what the fuck I want to hear from my new offensive line coach. So I'm going to definitely need to hear more about what the vision was in making this hiring, because it doesn't sound very encouraging. I'm not going to hold you. This dude just led the unit, the second worst offensive line unit in the history of the league. I believe the Eagles of like 86 are number one in sacks given up in a season with like 106. The Giants gave up 85 sacks this year. It doesn't matter who they put behind center. And their center regressed. Second line center that I wanted in the draft, John Michael Schmidt. Every lineman over there, not named Andrew Thomas, has regressed. Evan Neal, a guy they took in the top 5 of the draft, is a trash can. He doesn't look too much better than Andrew Wiley does here in DC. And I feel like a lot of that has to be attributed to the offensive line coach. I'm going through my conversation with my boy Danny. He is laughing like, yo, he did not think Bobby Johnson was going to get hired to get another job. And he was like, it'll tell you everything you need to know that he was certainly a Dabs guy. He was a Brian Daboll guy. He brought him over from his time in Buffalo. Bobby Johnson was the offensive line coach from 2019 through 2021 with Daboll in Buffalo. He brought him over to be the Giants, and in his 2 years, shit just went absolutely off the rails for the Giants O-line, and nobody has a positive spin on this hiring. But speaking of the Washington staff, Nikki Jabwala says among those not returning, per sources, tight ends coach Todd Storm, run game coordinator Juan Castillo, O-line coach Travell Wharton, and senior defensive assistant coach Richard Rogers. So those guys will all be getting their packing papers and their pink slips and moving on. For the most part, the staff is going to be a new one. Tavita Pritchard has made the cut, and Redskins legend Ryan Kerrigan has made the cut to stay on staff, which is obvious. That was an obvious move. That was a layup for the coaching staff. You want those kind of guys in the building. Ryan Kerrigan's young. Ryan Kerrigan's smart, has one of the highest football IQs there is. He's a guy who thrived on football IQ because he wasn't the most athletic guy. You've seen athletic freaks at the edge position who can't get home, but Ryan Kerrigan got home more than anybody in the history of the franchise off of technique and football savvy. So that's a guy you definitely want to keep a part of your staff going forward. That was an easy layup hiring, and keeping him as the linebackers coach / pass rush specialist, that's easy work for Dan Quinn and company. But let me know what y'all think in the comments about offensive lineman coach Bobby Johnson, OG Bobby Johnson, pushing players at practice, Bobby Johnson. Not very encouraging on first glance, but you never know. We seem to be putting together the redemption crew here in DC, the second chance reclamation project of coaching staffs here in DC. So let's hope all these guys in their second opportunity, third for Bobby Johnson, are able to redeem themselves, because their good name is looking real shaky in the light right now. But as it comes out, I'll be here to update you with the content. Washington has a new offensive lineman coach. Ryan Kerrigan, Heartbreak Kid, is here to stay in DC. That's all I got for right now. Hail to the Washington Commanders. Rio, out.